Welcome on to the next edition of Run with Coach Parry. I'm Brad Brown. It's good to have you with us. Lindsay, welcome back. Nice to touch base once again.
Yep, always is. How are you doing, Brad?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Getting back into the swing of things from a training perspective myself, so really enjoying it. Today, we've got a question about heart rate, everything heart rate related. And if you have a heart rate monitor, chances are if you're an average, ordinary, everyday runner, you're not using it to its full potential from a training perspective. And that's what we're getting into today, is just about heart rate and what sort of numbers you should be hitting. Before we get into the question, though, don't forget as well, we've made some big changes to our podcast. If you haven't checked it out yet, I'd really suggest you do head over to coachparry.com/podcast. There's some amazing chats that have happened over the last few weeks, sort of one-on-one coaching calls where we just really dig deep with one athlete and help them achieve their goals. So that URL to get to, coachparry.com/podcast. Lindsay, today's question, all things heart rate related. It came in on our forums on coachparry.com, and it's asking about heart rate and is it age-related? Is age-related heart rate max derivative reliable? I'm no scientist. That makes absolutely no sense to me. I'm sure it does to you, though. And also, how else can heart rate max be tested? Do you need to do it in a lab? And once you've got that information, what's the best way to utilize it in your training?
Okay, so look, just to answer the heart rate, the age-related heart rate, it's a fairly good measure. For the vast majority of the population, it's all right.
What is it? Just to give us a layman's explanation of what it is.
Effectively, most watches or products use a very simple measure to predict heart rate max, which is 220 minus age. Okay. And really that just takes into account the fact that as we get older, our maximum heart rate comes down, and that does hold true. The more active you have been and the fitter that you have maintained, or the higher the fitness you have maintained through your life, the slower that will come down. So it's not accurate. And there's always going to be some variation in there. However, as I said, for the vast majority of the population, 220 minus age gives a fairly good idea of what your maximum heart rate is. Okay. Personally, I've never really been much of a fan on pegging training off of a maximum value, and a far more valuable, it still works fairly well, and it's a better way of controlling intensity than having no control whatsoever. And your typical values are to say 75% of maximum is where you should be doing most of your easy training. So that's kind of your rule of thumb and how people have operated over the years. What I find much more useful, and particularly when you start getting to a point where you're starting to take your training really serious, you've perhaps been training for quite a long period of time, and those fitness gains are getting a little bit harder to come by, then it is much better to peg your heart rate training on your threshold heart rate. Okay, now, the part of the question here was, okay, do you need to measure maximum heart rate in the lab? And the answer to that question is no. And do you need to measure threshold in a lab? You don't have to, but that probably ensures that you get closer to the actual number, although physiology isn't black and white. So threshold is probably better to do in the lab, and I'm going to talk to you how you can do it out of the lab. But firstly, to get maximum heart rate outside the lab is quite easy. If you do roughly 3 minutes of all-out effort, and then let yourself recover, I'd probably say 2 to 3 times the actual effort that you put in. So for 3, you run all out for 3 minutes, and then jog or rest easy for 6 to 9 minutes, and then you repeat that 3 to 4 times, you will get pretty much close to your maximum heart rate. And what you can really do to try and load it in a way that you will get almost onto that maximum heart rate is you can do that on an incline. So if you do that, run as hard as you absolutely can up a hill you would get pretty close to your maximum heart rate. So in terms of threshold heart rate, in a lab, you would go through a system of stages where you slowly go faster and faster and faster, track things like oxygen consumption, carbon dioxide production, look at blood lactate, which just really helps us to, if we use the two methods, it helps us to just be more sure that we've hit the right point. And essentially, when we get to the point where your body is starting to produce more carbon dioxide than can be explained by the amount of oxygen that you are taking in, that will give us the point where quite a large contribution of of energy is coming from non-oxygen pathways, and we then call that the threshold. Another way of getting that threshold is to run between 35 and 40 minutes as hard as you can. So obviously some pacing is required there, but really the highest effort you can sustain for somewhere in the region of 35 to 40 minutes, that average heart rate for that effort will give you a pretty good idea of what your threshold heart rate is, and you can then use that. And the idea really is to do 80% of your training below that threshold value, probably somewhere in the region of 80% of threshold, 85% of threshold, and then to do 20% of your exercise at varying ranges above that threshold.
Okay, cool. If you want to find out more about that threshold and how to train with it, sort of that level of training, we did a video and a podcast on it a few weeks ago. You can just head back in the feed and you'll be able to find it there as well. That goes into a bit more detail. Lindsay, as always, great to catch up. Don't forget, if you'd like to join the Coach Parry online community, the website to get to is coachparry.com/join. That's where you can get all the details. We've got some great conversations happening in the forums as we continue our build up to the November marathons. A whole bunch of people training for various marathons, Soweto, Kaapstad, New York as well, and a couple others, PE in December. So make sure you check it out. It's all happening in our forums right now, getting advice from the coach every single day. We've got weekly Ask Me Anything calls as well, where you can literally get onto a call with Lindsay and get any questions answered that you need answered. So if you need any help, that's where you can get it. The website, once again, coachparry.com/join. Until next week, from the two of us, it's cheers.